all about mixing color and how do we get color and where does the color go. So as you know, right now you're all working on your final painting. So it's this foreground color, which is the tree and the landmass here. Then there's the midground and then the distant. Or they use the word hue. The way it's
Yeah.
used in art, the hue is really referred to the colors on the color wheel. So as you know, for example, brown's not on the color wheel, the outside color. Um, so they would, if they were talking technically about color, they would refer to brown as being in the orange family, right? So if you go around the outside of the, click this guy on. If you go on the outside of the wheel, the first thing is like, the hue. What color is it? And when we're mixing color for an area, we're dealing with our mind because we could see a bright color in the foreground and a bright color in the distance and actually think they're the same. Like if it's a bright lime color, we can think it's the same. So the first thing you've got to do is uh, pick the hue. What hue or family is it from? Every time I see brown, I say orange. Um, then there's the intensity of it. So like, is it a really intense as it is on the outside of that wheel, or is it less intense? Is it desaturated or fully saturated? So I could have this color and it could be fully saturated or it could be desaturated. By that, we also mean intensity. How intense is the color?
Hmm.
And then you take the same color. This slider just changes the value. So it's the same color, it's just lighter or darker. So it's without changing the color. When you're mixing paint, if you mixed a neutral black and you have white, you can keep adding it in and you're not changing that color. You're just making it lighter or darker. Then the other one is I have the color, but is it warmer or cooler? So I'm clicking on this little color wheel here and I'm moving more to the yellow. So it's warmer, but I could also go further away from the yellow and actually make it cooler or down even towards where it is actually cool there. But as I'm moving in that direction, I'm making it cooler. So it could still be in the orange family, but it's getting actually cooler. So all of those things come into when we're about to paint, whether it's something up close or something down apart. So the first thing I want to talk about is color intensity. Are you guys okay to see this?
Yeah.
Looks good.
So
Great.
here's a painting I just pulled off the web. And what we have typically is our cool colors are in the foreground. Sorry, our intense colors are in the foreground and our less intense colors are in the background. So I put values on this and I said, this tree over here, that dark is actually a value of 9 and 9 here. This midground 7, this is 4, and this is a 2. So if you look at our color ranges in here, it goes from a 2 to a 9. So that's like 8 variation of color. But in the background, it's a 4, 3, 4, and a 4. So this very light greenish color here, right inside of this. Hang on, I'm trying to pick up this very light color in here. You see, I've got the scale in here. By the way, I came up with this. I thought, it's hard to understand value. So I came out with a value chart with a hole in it with the same principle we had talked about before, where at 9, it's too dark. And at 1, it's too light. But eventually, when you get in around the range, it disappears. Like it's harder to see. So that green in there is a 4. And this light purple up in here, it's also a round of 4, the same thing. So even though they've changed the color, the value is actually the same. Even the sky up in here is a 4. So in our painting, where we have a tree and our landmass in front, we have to have a real variation in color. We have to go from, a very dark color to very light colors. And they have to be more intense and stronger in the foreground. Am I going to do anything on this thing? I'm going to skip through this. I was going to show you that value chart, which I actually just did. I sent everybody these pages for you. If you didn't get them, just let me know and I'll resend them. But this talks about, in the foreground, vibrant, saturated colors. So those are those bright colors on the outside of the wheels that mean they're very vibrant. So you could take a color that's vibrant and just dim it down and make it less vibrant as you go more distance. So intense, fully saturated. Saturation, what we mean by out of the tube, it's fully saturated. And as I dilute it with other colors, it becomes less saturated. And of course, if I dilute it with black, it becomes less saturated and more, and I'm graying the color. So you'll hear people talk about graying your paints, or they'll refer back to a painting like this, and they'll say all the distant colors are grayed. Well, that could be physically putting gray into your color, but the idea is that you've desaturated the color and you've gone back. So I'm not going to spend any more time on this one, so I'm going to illustrate this as we go. Hey, by the way, I'm open for questions as we go. So again, if you think about foreground, what makes a painting work is more saturated colors in the foreground, more variation of value from a dark to a light, and detail. So, seeing the rocks or even branches on a tree, and you can't do that in the background. It has to be less vibrant, desaturated, less detail, and less texture. So that's what makes this work, because it has all those things. Remember, we might be standing there looking at a scene trying to paint it. But in reality, we're working on this, two-dimensional, smallish, canvas. So what I'm talking about is, what are the tricks to make it work as if it is three-dimensional? And by that meaning very little variation of value, making it bluer as it goes back, no detail, no texture, and then up front doing this. Now, there's dozens of paintings out there in which the foreground is dark and then it's light in the background. One of my favorite paintings is by Tom Thompson, and it's called Northern River. And he's standing in the woods in the dark, looking out into the river, which is quite light. So the dark foreground is now going to be desaturated because it's quite dark, right? But the midground, where the light's hitting, is also desaturated. In other words, you can't suddenly saturate the midground because it's got light on it, or you've got to make sure that it's still desaturated. It'll look dark because the foreground is dark. I'll show you something in a minute. So look at this. This mountain back here, I'm going to put this over on top of it, is this color. That mountain is that color. So it is a long way away. It's desaturated. In other words, you can see how dull this circle is here. It's desaturated. I can look at it along here, and that it's the value is darker and it's bluer. So there it is. It's a green, if you look at that, if you're standing there looking at it and you were looking at the whole scene, your eye, depending on the light, would tell you that's green and I could actually see trees. But look at the color you'd have to mix. So you'd have to go desaturated blue, less details. This midground in here. Now you can see this shoreline over here. You can see the shoreline here. And of course, this is the foreground. This very dark color there is here.
Hmm.
This intense color over here is that color. And then where it gets a little bit darker, I think this is actually, see those trees in there, you can actually see. But look at the lack of variation of value. Like that's all within the exact, pretty close range. I'm gonna just change the value on this thing. Like, look, if I lighten that up, it's really quite dark in that range. Now here's the foreground. This is the grass here. This is these trees in here. I've got a little bit greener. And this is these bushes up in here. So in your foreground, there's a huge, like if I were to put this on a value scale, this would probably be about, like the value would probably be about this. This would probably be a 2 or 3. This would be a 5, and this would be a 9 or an 8. Like the value range here versus the value range there. So you got to have more intense color, more saturation, more texture, and more range from light to dark. That's what brings it up into the close to you. You can't take these colors and put them back here. You probably could. This one could go back, but these ones can't go back there. Now, if you want, like a general rule I have is more yellow. Like all red, yellow, and blue are in this area, but I just always say my yellow goes up in the foreground, my intense yellow. What I'm doing here, by the way, is I've got a lot of words on these diagrams, but I'm using the same language to try to actually show you what it meant when it talked about the distant gets less detail, less intense. It gets bluer because of atmosphere. So let's talk about how do we actually mix the paint? Like how do we actually make those colors? So if you think about a range of colors, I'm just using the same 1 to 9, and I take, this should be over here a little bit. I take phthalo blue. I'm gonna get you guys to ask if you did have a chance to use that chart I sent you a little bit, but you can actually look up the value of phthalo blue, and the value of phthalo blue in that chart is 2. And cadmium yellow light, the value is 8.5. So I just put it at 8. So if I take those colors, so there they are there, and here they are here, and now I'm mixing my range of colors. I'm in the foreground with a range of colors. So this is phthalo blue with a little tiny, teeny bit of yellow in it. And this is cadmium yellow light with a little teeny tiny bit of phthalo blue in it. And that is one of the ways to mix your paints. In other words, from this side, take your color and just put a little bit of the opposite color in, and then from this side start coming. But look at the full range of different shades I have, from a very light to a dark, and look how rich they are. This is, if you have to use white, in other words, I can't get here, if this is right out of the tube, I can't get here without white. One of the tricks that someone taught me years ago, if I'm going to use it, Don't mix the white into your paint. Paint the area or the surface that you're going to paint first white. And then when it dries, put your transparent cadmium yellow light over top of it. So I did that here. But look at the luminosity that you've got out of that paint. It would never be that luminous if I had mixed it into the white and then painted it. Now, here's the same color, meaning phthalo blue, which is here. This is black, and this is white. Now, this is the one I catch or I see people doing most often, because what they do is they look at their painting and they say, I'm going to go and lighten this up. So they go and get their white. Now, they may not use black, but they'll pull out a dark blue to go back. So here they are. They're mixing their colors, and they're using white and a dark blue. And there's the green. And what happens is you're going to get this range of colors now. You can get the dark, and then it's coming into the green. And then look at these range. There is no yellow here. There is no light color. But those colors are more of your mid-tone, like mid-range colors. They're not the colors up close. And the one you'll hear me saying is, I'll always say in class, it looks chalky. It looks chalky. What I'm looking at is these colors here with the most white in them. And look at the difference here in my range of colors. So not much difference here in the black, but it starts right about here in terms of my green. And you can see this is a flatter, less luminous color. But by here, there's a huge, in my eye, there's a huge difference between these two colors. And here it's outstanding. So do you remember I said you want to get a good range in terms of your values, meaning from a 8 to say a 2, that's a really good range. And that's the range you'll see in the foreground. I'm assuming that I'm talking about our painting that's lit the way it's lit. You'll definitely find paintings where it's shade in the foreground and then the midground's lit up. I'm just making a generalization, but the purpose of this generalization is do not use white in the foreground when you're mixing your paint. I'm going to say it again. Don't use white in mixing your foreground colors. If you think about a color wheel, if you want to lighten something, go up the color wheel. So if I've got red, I'm going to lighten it with orange. If I have orange, I'm going to lighten it with yellow. And you just keep working your way up. So if I have a blue, I can lighten it with a green. I've got yellow at the top of my color wheel. What that means is that my colors are going to be vibrant, and vibrant colors are in your foreground. So there's an illustration. It doesn't matter what color I'm talking about. It's the same thing. When you put white in it, it becomes chalky. Now, if you take this, maybe I can do this even bigger here for a sec. If you take this color chart and you put it over this foreground area, you can see that yellow and that green 7 fit in there nicely. Look at this green here. Try to imagine that green sitting somewhere in there. It just does not go. But I would argue that this and this also don't go. And this works, but it's not vibrant enough. Like that color could work in there, but it's lacking its vibrancy. I'm just going to do it this way. I'm going to come across with these colors coming across the middle here. And also look at look at the range of colors. Look at this dark. It's probably darker in the photograph, but it's definitely a 1 or 2. And then look at in the tree in here, we got this certainly number 8, but yeah, certainly number 8, not number 9 is in that tree. But look what happens when we go out here now. It's the opposite. These vibrant colors will never work out there, but these desaturated colors work. So you want to go 2 ways with desaturation. You want to desaturate your color and make it bluer as it goes back. It loses through the atmosphere. It's gone blue, and you've lost your yellow and your red. Albeit I put in some purplish color, so I got some red in it. And then over here, there's not a big range in terms of the values in this area. This is a little darker than it actually is in the painting. The tops of these trees are actually lit. But in general, I'm trying to do a comparison between this here and here. So even if this was in the shadow, you'd still put in, and this had sunlight on it, they would still be desaturated colors. In other words, they would not be these colors back here. As soon as you go distance, you desaturate, less vibrancy, and less range of color. Now here's what I was talking about. Here is the sun is shining in the foreground with very dark shades in here, a wide range of vibrancy. And then you saw those colors that I showed you in the background. But here's the opposite. This grass is now in the dark and the shade, and now the sunlight is back in here. Now, here's what your mind wants to tell you. Your mind is going to tell you that these colors are those colors. Okay? But what I've done is I got a little, I'll show it to you here. I got this little plant, and I took a color from here and I put it back here, and I took a color from here and switched them. Now look at them. So the color back here is this dark, is this color. I'm gonna go back. What I've done is I've put a little spot here on this color, and I put this little spot there. And I've just switched them back now. So if I was to describe this color versus this one, I'd start to say it's desaturated, it's darker, so its value is darker. And in here, there's less of a range of colors than in this area in here. So if you came up with just a couple of things well, everything is written down on your list, but in the foreground, which is go back to let me just see this for a second. If you go back to our painting, which you're working on now, the color of this is a little bit off, I'm not sure, but if you go back to working on this, you want vibrant colors. You want a big range between the lightest and the darkest. You want to put in detail, and you want texture. That's how this area works. What will not work is a desaturated color in which this has been mixed with white, and the same color on this side of the tree is used on that side of the tree, so you don't have those darkish colors. And you're not putting on detail or not putting on texture. All of a sudden, you'll come up with a very flat-looking tree, and the foreground won't be in front. So that's really what I wanted to go over tonight. And I might just leave this on if anybody has any questions or wants me to go over anything with that.